of Rome was a big deal. And then finally, Alexandria. What was important about Alexandria? Well, first of all, it was one of the great cities of the ancient world, but it was also a center of great intellect and learning. This was the Oxford or the Cambridge, right, of the ancient world. And so these four cities, these bishops of those cities, became more prominent than other ones and sort of began to exercise an authority over the bishops of the smaller cities in their area. So, after some time, there naturally arose the idea of regional church government, with the bishop who led the Christians in a particular city having oversight and authority over a broader region. As churches grew in cities, so did the idea of the metropolitan bishop. A metropolitan bishop, that's what they would call the bishop of Spital, okay? But then the patriarchal bishop, those would be the ones of these major patriarchal cities: Rome, Antioch, Jerusalem, and Alexandria. Now, what happens when you generally have four patriarchal cities like this and four prominent bishops among them? Naturally, they will tend to compete. Now listen, not all of them at all times, right? I mean, conceivably at any one time you could have four humble, godly men who were heading up these churches but at other times, for whatever reasons, you would have other times where one of these would be trying to exercise authority over the other four, right? One of them trying to say, I'm more important than the other four. And let me give you an example of how Rome tried to exert authority over the other three and over all other Christians. And it's something called the Quartodeciman controversy, which I know all you guys could tell me all about, but just to save you the embarrassment of having to speak in front of the class, let me just explain to you what the Quartodeciman controversy was. It was all about when to celebrate Easter. In Latin, the word quartodecimus means 14th. Now, the church in Rome and in Europe had always celebrated Easter on Sunday, the first Sunday after the 14th of Nisan on the Jewish calendar. Okay, so they find the Jewish calendar, the 14th of Nisan, and they take the first Sunday that happens after that. So in Rome and in Europe, they always celebrated Easter on a Sunday. But the Quartodecimans, Christians from Ephesus and most of the churches of Asia Minor, they always celebrated Easter on the 14th of Nisan, no matter what day of the week that it fell on. Right? There's two different ways you can celebrate a holiday, right? You can celebrate Thanksgiving always on a Thursday, right? Or you can celebrate the 4th of July always on the 4th of July, right? And so the Christians in this region of Asia Minor and Ephesus, in this general area, they were the Quartodecimans. They said the 14th of Nisan, that's the day that Jesus rose from the dead. That's the day we're going to recognize it. Or was crucified, whatever. That was the day that they selected for their thing. Over here in Rome and in this area and in Europe, the Christians said, no, Easter happened on a Sunday. We should always have it on a Sunday. And so that was the difference between the two camps. Well, that meant that in some years, Christians were remembering the death of Jesus on the same day that other Christians were remembering his resurrection. And it wouldn't make it a big deal if it just happened in Asia Minor and in Rome. You say, well, who cares, right? These Christians don't even know when these ones are celebrating Easter. But no, I'll tell you where it made a difference was in a city like Rome. Because in a big city like Rome, you would have a lot of Christians who lived from these areas and who had moved to Rome for any number of reasons. And in their neighborhoods and in their cultures and their churches, they would be celebrating Easter on their day, while the rest of Rome would be celebrating Easter on their day. You see how complicated this would become? Well, here's the bottom line. The bottom line is that the Bishop of Rome at first sort of, agreed to disagree with this. The Bishop of Rome, around the year 150, when he was visited by Polycarp of Smyrna, Polycarp tried to persuade the Bishop of Rome, hey, you should celebrate it the way we do. And the Bishop of Rome said, no, but let's just each one of us do how we like to do it. We'll just agree to disagree. But 40 years later, Victor, the Bishop of Rome, he tried to command a resolution. He tried to make the Eastern Christians follow the Western custom. Now, he was met with very stiff opposition by Polycrates, the Bishop of Ephesus. Victor tried to excommunicate this Bishop of Ephesus and the churches of Asia Minor over the matter, and many people objected to the arrogance of Bishop Victor. And matter of fact, the church in Asia Minor used to celebrate Easter on that 14th of Nisan, no matter what day of the week it fell on, up until the 5th century. Now, what I'm trying to show you is that Victor, the Bishop of Rome, did not succeed in making the Ephesian Christians, the Christians of Asia Minor, do what he thought they should do. But this shows us two things. First of all, that the Roman bishop thought he had the right to do it, right? I mean, wouldn't we almost say, who are you to tell them? But you see, he thought he had the right to do it. But number two, it wasn't agreed upon. It shows that the Christians did not feel obligated to obey the Bishop of Rome, right? That these Christians in Ephesus could just say, forget you, Victor. We don't have to celebrate Easter on the day you tell us to. We're going to do it on the day that our conscience tells us to do it. And so this is what I want you to see. Do you see here the Bishop of Rome trying to take authority over these different areas, but at the same time being resisted in his efforts to take authority? Okay, that has to do with geography and sort of church government. But there's another aspect of geography that we need to consider, and it's geography and theology. The wide geography of the early church also meant that there were Christians from many different intellectual and philosophical traditions. Over time, three main centers of Christian thought emerged. Okay? Just as much as there were four patriarchal centers, there were patriarchal cities, there were also three major intellectual centers of the church. In Alexandria, in Antioch, and in Carthage were these three major intellectual centers. The Alexandrian center, which was represented by men like Clement and Origen, their tendency was to emphasize Greek philosophy. The Antiochian center in Asia Minor, represented by Irenaeus, his tendency was to order things after the bishop. And then the North African center, represented by Tertullian and Cyprian, their tendency was very practical and very rigid. Now, these three centers of Christian thought became more and more important in their influence upon what Christians believed and taught. What I'm trying to say is that this is in some ways the fragmentation of Christianity, right? The diversity. Because different regions would begin to emphasize different aspects of Christian theology. So in Alexandria, they would try to understand Christianity in light of Greek philosophers. And they would say, listen, if we could just really explain Christianity in terms of Greek philosophy, then people would really understand it. So that was the Alexandrian center. Then there was the Antiochian center, again represented by Irenaeus. His tendency was to really order things after the bishop. He was into structure. He was into order. He was into this idea of ordering things after the bishop. And then you have the North Africa Center. I have to tell you, you and I think of North Africa today, and we think only of Islam. We think of a place that's dangerous for Christians. You should know that for many centuries, North Africa was an area of tremendous Christian presence and influence, and some of the most wonderful and brilliant Christian leaders that the church has ever seen have come to us from North Africa. And again, Carthage, represented here by Tertullian and Cyprian, these guys tended to be practical and rigid with a real emphasis on holiness. They would look at the Alexandrian guys and say, oh, you're so speculative. You're just a bunch of philosophers. We're down to the practical things of